Welcome to Between the Rows, where you get to hear the stories behind the stories in Canada's leading farm publications.
Hi, and welcome back to Between the Rows. I'm Laura Rance, Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia. This is the fourth in a four-part series exploring the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on agriculture in Canada. In this segment, host Dave Bedard focuses on some of the financial risks and the opportunities for farm managers. Here's Dave.
If I had to make an estimate, I'd say I've received roughly 50 bazillion emails in the past couple of weeks from various companies I deal with, explaining to their customers, employees, suppliers, and investors what their near-term strategies and responses are against the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, don't get me wrong here. These messages are important, and very few of them are just boilerplate text. Our topic for this segment is essentially what your COVID-19 strategy email would say if you had to send one today. Terry Betker is CEO of Backswath Management, a farm management consulting business, and he joins us now. Terry, hello, and welcome back to Between the Rows.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Dave. Happy to be part of this.
Now, obviously, even if we weren't in the middle of an unprecedented event in recent history, every farm has its own unique set of circumstances, and we can't make any sweeping generalizations that could cover them all. But are there prevailing themes in the sorts of questions that your clients have right now?
Well, I think I could maybe group it into two aspects. One is obviously what does all this mean, but then there's the potential impact on their businesses, both from a revenue side and from an expense side. But largely, I think you can almost underpin all of that with simply uncertainty. What is and how is this all going to manifest on farms and the farm economy? Mm-hmm. The general comments that we're hearing is, as you would expect, on the opportunity side, I suppose, if you will, is okay. Interest rates are lower, so how do we capitalize on the interest rates, or when should we try to capitalize on interest rates? So if a farm has their debt structured as being variable, or a lot of it as being variable or floating, they're already benefiting from the lower interest rates associated with this. Longer term, then, farms that have some of their debt at fixed rates and locked in, it becomes a mathematical calculation, I guess, is the cost of any penalty associated with paying out those loans and then flipping them into a new loan at a lower interest rate. That's a math calculation. Largely, the challenge, or what I'm hearing, is when would we do this if we were going to? Because if you do it, can the rates go lower? Can they? I mean, we're at 25 Canadian prime, I believe, at 25 basis points, and that's as low as it's been. Or could it go lower? Could you go to negative? I mean, it becomes really a timing.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the broader business management sense, and at the broader sense of risk management, the more I'm reading about commodity markets and about just investment in general these days, I'm not sensing a whole lot of appetite for risk, certainly in a situation such as this. What should farmers keep in mind when they're managing their risks in a risk averse environment?
I think top of mind, and in fact, I just literally got off a call talking to a farm family about this. I think liquidity, working capital, liquidity, cash flow. Try to optimize cash flow, and when you have a chance to sell grain, if it's at a price that you're happy with, obviously, then yes, do what can be done to optimize cash flow. It'll see you through. If there's farms that are in more highly leveraged, that have concern about overall debt and what margins of profit or narrowing margins of profit might do to their ability to honor their financial commitments, make principal payments on loans, etc. then I think it would just make good sense to me to be going and talking to lenders. The federal government has taken steps to make some some funds available to farmers, and if optimized cash flow, Dave, and if they're more highly leveraged or worried about long-term cash flow, then I would be suggesting go to talk to their lenders and say, okay, what can I do here? What are my stopping short, perhaps, of taking aggressive steps to reorganize balance sheets, restructure? But what are the options? What could they do in a situation where they were forced to take some action? Those are two things that I would be doing, Dave.
Mm-hmm. And certainly, this is something we're going to be talking about a lot in the future, and we hope to have you back on the show at that time. Terry Betker, thanks very much for joining us today.
I'm happy to talk to you anytime, Dave. Thanks very much, and hope everything works out as good as you can.
Us too. Terry Betker is CEO of Backswath Management. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host for this segment, Dave Bedard. The past few years of trade wars and domestic and diplomatic disputes have set a stage where continued uncertainty is perhaps the only certainty in business these days, and it was in that environment where the COVID-19 pandemic arrived. We're sure seeing a much keener awareness now of the constant that people are always going to need to eat, but at the same time, pandemic planning has forced massive job losses on many of those people and stretched public resources even thinner. We'd already been seeing somewhat of a retreat in aggressive business growth activities, and the question farm businesses face is how to maintain stability at uncertain times. To discuss that, we've convened a panel, including Tom Button, editor of Country Guide. Hi, Tom.
Hi there, Dave.
We've also got John Grieg, the editor of Farmtario. Hi, John.
Hi, Dave.
And last but not least, Ed White of the Western Producer is here in Winnipeg at a social distance of about 3 miles or so. Hello, Ed.
Hey, Dave, and hi, everybody else, too.
Now, the other day when I was doing our weekly video news roundup, and I referred to farmers as being among the national champs of social distancing, but spring is coming up fast, and here I'm looking at your latest column in Country Guide, Tom, where you observed another fundamental truth, that the connections that farmers have with their neighbors and with their community is what keeps them and their businesses well grounded.
Sure, Dave. It's, it is absolutely true, and nobody can deny that farmers, are very independent people. They do independent thinking. They do a lot of work on their own or in small groups that tend to be isolated from others. But we tend to downplay how much contact farmers have with others and how diverse that contact is really becoming. So just think, of in the old days we might think of a farmer, calling across the line fence, but now it's, think of trying to get through seeding season without umpteen trips to town, either to the dealership or to the hardware store or wherever. Think of all the different kinds of partnerships and joint ventures that farmers are getting involved in. Think of all the experts that they're talking to, the people who are driving down the lane to make deliveries. It really is quite a diverse thing, and it, as I say, it's increasing all the time, I think. Just imagine, I was trying to do a quick count in my own head the other day of the number of, we all know that land rental acres are increasing, and just think of how many conversations that means for farmers dealing with other landlords, either when they're setting up the contract or when they're doing the actual work. Geez, farming more and more is becoming the kind of business where there's handshakes every day. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm. But I guess the question is, what can they do really to get around that and to maintain those connections in this time?
But there was one thing that I wanted to say, and I wanted to say it, fairly loud and clear from my point of view, because I know that I tend to be the kind of person who likes to put things off and procrastinate from time to time. But if you're a farmer out there, or if you're working on a farm and you haven't done things like write down what your passwords are, if you haven't thought through to yourself, okay, if I'm the one who gets coronavirus and COVID-19, and I'm the one who's sidelined because, I was talking to the wrong person in the store, or somebody coughed on me or something, will the farm be able to keep on going smoothly and efficiently without you? So it really is time to make sure that you write down those passwords, that you think all the processes through, make sure that the rest of the family knows, okay, if this happens, this is the person that you contact. They know what our situation is. Make sure that the family is aware of any marketing commitments that you've made. And so they won't be surprised, if there's a call or a put option out there that all of a sudden gets flagged, or if you've made a sales agreement with somebody down the road. Make sure that they're aware of all of those things, and then make sure that everybody else in the family knows that they need to put their own information up too, so that it's all going to be accessible, so that if somebody does get sick, you can keep on operating. It just makes good sense. As I say, it's something that's easy to procrastinate on. If you have never done it, or if you haven't done it for the last 2 years, get back into it and just make sure it's all up to date.
Mm-hmm. Now, John, there was a recent article in Farmterio about the dairy sector in the province and elsewhere having to respond and adapt to this reality where much of the on-farm service delivery that we see in that sector, it's been postponed for at the very least another week or more, other than the trucks coming in to pick up the milk. I guess it looks like this sector has triaged its needs, at least for now.
I think there have been a lot of steps taken in the agriculture sector, and fairly quickly and fairly responsibly. And I think because it is possible to do so. So, in the dairy sector specifically, Holstein Canada isn't doing classifications anymore. In Ontario and other places where there's been an essential service limitation created. Lactanet, which was formed last year, the coming together of Velacta, Canada DHI, and Canadian Dairy Network, they basically said, and they usually go into farms to do milk testing, that they're not doing that. So I think especially once that essential service designation was made, here some of them who were not even, maybe you could argue that they were, but they pulled back, to limit the risk to farmers and to their own staff, because they're, in the case of classifiers, they go into multiple farms a day, and that's an issue for creating, for becoming ultra security and biosecurity right now. And then in other areas, I know that you can get your tractor service, or you can get your seeds delivered, or go buy some seeds. But in Ontario, a lot of those service providers have locked their doors. They just said, well, call us when you need something. Then you can come in and see us. We'll figure out what you need, or we'll send something out for you. Or you can bring your tractor and we can park it here and we can talk to people that you don't necessarily have. You can maintain that social distance that we're talking about so much. So I think that the sector has quickly figured out ways of doing it. It does help that that you can do a lot of the things you need to do by with a bit of distance, or on a one-to-one basis. Other things I think of, there's lots of farmers talking online about how to do e-signatures. Just so all the paper that comes into a farm at this time of year, especially with deliveries, and how do you just do an e-signature? And I know accountants it's tax season, although it's been the tax deadline has been deferred. They are they're really they've closed their offices, and they're really encouraging their clients, including their farmer clients, to use online portals to share documents. So I think there's been a lot of steps taken.
Mm-hmm. And Ed, you've been speaking recently with some folks in the veterinary sector where infectious disease planning is already in place from an animal health standpoint. But is there anything that we can learn really from producers' experiences when it comes to dealing with a human pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's where people that work in hog barns is both, the people that own and operate the barn, but also the sort of unique thing about hog barns, especially farrowing operations, is they actually have a workforce, and there are quite a few people working with any significant hog barn operation. And so they have a unique challenge, but as you pointed out, they have unique experiences in controlling multiple pandemics on the animal side over the years. So, right now we've been talking for the last year about African swine fever, but before that, there have been, one wave after another of pig diseases come sweeping through here in, Manitoba and Ontario and Alberta. We've all had PED come through in recent years as well. So in terms of the concepts of biosecurity, most people that work in the hog industry understand that. They know how to isolate populations. They know how to stop transfer of risks between different parts of the operation. What's different here is they don't generally think of themselves as being subject to getting a disease or being, they see themselves transferring animal diseases around as people, but not themselves having to control their own interaction with each other to not get it themselves, which is sort of a unique situation here. And as one of the vets was saying to me a couple of days ago, when they went and looked at how barns operate, as he said, we touch so many things every day that other people touch. And that's a reality out there in the barns. If you think of all the doorknobs, all the, even people to control the risk to animal disease, you shower in and you shower out of most barns these days. And change all the clothing. Well, with that, you're touching shower handles, you're touching shower doors, you're touching maybe if you've got a towel hanging up there, the towel rack. And these are all now new risks to your fellow workers and the people on the farm that people haven't really thought about much before. So they're having to come up with a whole new set of biosafety protocols for the humans. But at least, these kind of people in this unique part of agriculture do understand the basics of biosafety and biosecurity.
Mm-hmm. How solid are the fundamentals of agriculture right now, from a business perspective? What don't we know about what's coming up in agriculture?
I think there's been a good example of the last few days where the Harmony Beef in Alberta and All in All in Quebec have both had to shut their plants because of employees who have tested positive to COVID-19. So that I think is the real unknown. I think the system is fairly robust and fairly secure, and as we've talked about, the business can go on with some fairly good socialization, except for a few pinch points like things like the livestock meat processors. So I think that's one of the biggest concerns, because that animals back up to the farm very quickly when a processor goes down.
David, I can jump in for just a second, and just to cast it in slightly different terms, the way that, in kind of MBA speak, when they think of a concept of resiliency, because I think we're thinking more about the resiliency of agriculture now rather than the kinds of things that we normally consider part of our risk management strategies, which have to do with yields and prices and things like that. And so, from a business point of view, resiliency basically contains two different ideas within it. One of those ideas is how much of a knock can you take? Like, what can you absorb? And I think in that regard, agriculture is probably as well positioned as it's been forever, probably, at least in my lifetime. There are some sectors doing better than others, of course, and there are some individual farms that are doing better than others. But for the most part, agriculture is there, and it's got a fair ability now to absorb some hits. The other side of it, though, is agility. So resiliency contains that idea that, okay, you can take a knock, but you can also bounce back from it pretty quickly, or you can take advantage of opportunities to jump in and grow the farm, or maybe move in other ways towards the long-term direction that you've got set. And I think in that regard, we're probably seeing that there's a lot more difference among farms in the countryside. Some farms are very self-directed, really seem to be focused on where it is that they want to go. They've got a plan in place. They've got a bit of a war chest that's built up, and they've got it accessible, and they're looking for opportunities like this to maybe grow or move or evolve in one way or another. And so I know we're in very, very early days of all of this, but I just think if in a couple of years we might be looking back at this summer as time when we saw more differentiation amongst farms, which ones were really getting serious about growing for the future, and which ones maybe, weren't quite as quick to grab the opportunities that come along.
And Dave, it said here, I'd say in terms of the risk over the medium term, obviously we have a short-term problem here. And what's interesting with that is, prices have not fallen out of the market. So that they've weakened, but it's not like what's happened with oil or some of and certainly not with stocks and what's happened with some bond issues becoming illiquid. But over the medium term, it's harder to tell what's going to happen. What's good, it's not that agricultural commodities are recession-proof, but they're relatively recession-proof compared to other commodities. I mean, copper can just completely, demand can dry up, in some circumstances, whereas if people do generally keep eating, if they can possibly afford it during bad times, that's one good thing. But the risk parameters are different in terms of what you need to hedge against and control. And it's very different between various types of agricultural commodity, say with, as was being mentioned a few moments ago, with processing plants and slaughter plants. If those go down, if those close, all of a sudden you can have a bit of a crisis on particularly a hog operation, because you have nowhere to keep those animals. With cattle to some degree, you can essentially warehouse them on grass or keep them on a bit longer in a feedlot. With a hog barn, you run out of room almost immediately within a week or two, and so that can create a real crisis. And at the same time, because of that, prices can absolutely collapse, and so you can't hang on to them, and you can't get them slaughtered without just dumping them for nothing, which has happened at various times. That's not likely to happen with grain. You can keep that in the bin and ride things out for quite a long period of time. Other types of livestock you can tend to hang on to for a while, but in terms of people needing to really, really control their risks, I think, the hog guys always have that particular problem and need to be looking at that. But for other folks, there's lots of strategies they should probably be looking for new crop and for, the fall run with calves.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about resiliency and adaptability. I mean, is there room though in this environment to limit expenses and contain costs?
Well, I think there's going to be naturally for a lot of businesses as costs are going to be controlled somewhat because nobody's moving as far, not as much is happening. So I think there's going to be and oil and fuel prices are down. Even the diesel price isn't down as drastically as the gasoline price. But I think farmers are still going to have to spend to get the crop into to get things going. So I think there's a certain amount where they're not going to be able to do things. I wonder about labor, that there may be some labor options. There's labor's risk, but there may be, if there's fewer people employed, that there may be some other people you can go out and hire if you need to for some that can help your efficiency. You may have teenage children at home who need something to do too these days when usually they're at school during certain periods of time in the spring. So I think there's some things that they can manage that way as well. Then they could defer equipment sales, although most farmers, we're coming into spring quickly here, probably have already made decisions on equipment already.
Yeah, for my part, looking at this, I don't really know how farmers can substantially control their operating costs, because I don't think farmers are wasting money. I think the products they're buying, they need to use to be prudent farmers, and that's right. They're not spending money because they like spending it. Today, if it's seed treatments or the amount of fertilizer you use, most farmers know that it's almost always a mistake to scale back on fertilizer to save expenses. So other than, scaling back those things like capital purchases and capital costs, I don't know how you really reduce a lot of your expenses. With labor, those people are doing something. And so people may not be able to hire as much or as many people, depending on their operation, but that probably has a cost in production in some way. So it's a real tough one, I think, for most farmers. They can't flip out of, the more expensive crops to cheaper ones without wrecking their rotations. Most farmers don't want to, be, what they would view as not very responsible with their rotation just to save a few bucks. So I don't know what you do. They're kind of caught in their production system.
Sure. And Dave, I'm going to just agree with what John and Ed have said. I think farmers already excel at cost containment and at the overall concept of continuous improvement. That's just what they do. That's how they got here where they are now. And if they hadn't excelled at it, that not what the outcome would have been. I think there is still going to be some increased focus by a lot of farmers on where exactly they're spending their money, and the numbers that we see from benchmarking studies suggest that that's well warranted. And if this were earlier in the season, if we had known back in November that we were going to have this sort of issue that we would be approaching, I think probably we would have spent a lot more of the winter looking more diligently at some of those benchmarking numbers. But even so, I think farmers are on the right track. There's absolutely no question about that, and they're going to continue to watch those costs very, very scrupulously. I come back to the other question, though, about the overall sense of direction and the overall sense of, well, where is it that we want to go, and how do we want to get there, and are there going to be opportunities for us over the coming year to take advantage? You mentioned yourself, lower interest rates. There may be, other kinds of opportunities that come up. We know that a lot of farmers have diversified outside of agriculture, and is this going to be an opportunity for them to say, okay, well, one of the ways that we're going to manage our risks for the future and the longer term is to have, more of a broader portfolio, and I expect that there will be a lot of farmers who are looking at that as well. So I think most of the farmers that we got out there, I keep on telling people that, the reason I like being in agriculture is that there's so many smart people out there who are doing it. And I think this is one of those years where we're going to see a lot of smarts come to the surface. And if you were to put this same panel together back in the fall or maybe next spring, and we started telling you the stories that we had heard about all the interesting things that farmers have done to try to find some silver linings and find some good out of this and drive their operations for the long term, I think we're going to just be really impressed.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to add about other measures that farmers can take to maintain, or to maintain at least, or if not to excel in this environment?
Just in a kind of basic production way, if you mean like with practical production, just sticking with the sort of hog barn example, there are lots of things you can do to sort of minimize your risk of this disease spreading within the barn and completely upending your production. There are all sorts of practical measures you can take, like dividing your workforce into different teams that are never in the coffee room together at the same time. These are kind of unique hog barn concerns because there's so many more people generally involved, but there are little practical measures that can be taken to minimize the risks of this kind of human contact and just keep at least the production side, running pretty well, and hopefully this disease will pass by. And I think that's what a lot of people are discovering now, is that there's lots of things they haven't thought about on the human risk side. They're going to have to think of on top of either crop or livestock production risk.
Mm-hmm. And John?
Yeah, the point I was, Ed made a very similar point to what I was going to make, and it's just basically the risk you can manage is in people and in keeping yourself healthy and in taking this whole thing seriously. We know farm operators tend to be older, and this thing is definitely being tougher on older people. And just in back, Tom's saying, you be prepared, whether you're in case you get sick, and because this can be a nasty bug.
Mm-hmm. And let's hope that that everybody can keep on top of it. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time.
Great, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Good to talk to you all.
Tom Button is the editor of Country Guide. John Greig is the editor of Farmterio, and Ed White is a reporter and columnist for the Western Producer. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host for this segment, Dave Bedard.
That's all we have for you in this special 4-part series of Between the Rows. But we will continue to follow the impact of COVID-19 and other issues on agriculture in our usual weekly podcast. Thanks for listening in. We hope you'll join us again. I'm Laura Rance.
Between the Rows is a production of Glacier FarmMedia, Canada's leading farm publisher. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and invite you to send your comments to btr@farmmedia.com or visit us at membersgetmore.ca and sign up today